usually don't draw those connections. They just go, oh, well, I'm not okay right now. And my big thing is most of the time, people, you haven't been okay for a long time. You just didn't know. Now it feels unbearable because those coping mechanisms that you were using are no longer working for you. So it isn't that you just became undone. You've been undone for a minute, and it was probably because of the trauma that you experienced some time ago. There's no way around that, you know?
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Legacy Speaks. My name is Sierra Hillsman, and I'm a licensed professional counselor and founder of the Legacy Speaks podcast. I definitely am looking forward to having another amazing conversation with a fellow clinician of color. Her name is Extriara Gates, and she is the founder of Lavender Psychotherapy. And so we're going to talk a little bit about trauma, depression, anxiety, and all things mental health. And so please help me welcome Miss Extriara Gates. How are you?
Wonderful. How about you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for asking. And so, Extriara, can you please let the people know a little bit about Lavender Grove Psychotherapy?
Absolutely. So Lavender Grove was founded about 3 years ago, right at the top of COVID, so to speak. I have been working in the mental health space for about 7 years, but more so around program development and just developing programs for social emotional groups. And, you know, of course, like many of us, I was home. I had the extra time to really start diving into private practice. And so we took off at about 2018, and it's been going from there.
Oh, that is so exciting. I'm so glad that things are flourishing and thriving with your practice. Obviously, the whole point of the Legacy Speaks podcast is to showcase and highlight other clinicians of color. Oftentimes I hear, where are the Black clinicians at? I'm like, we out here, y'all. We are out here. And so I do want to dive into your specialty. You specifically help women of color, Black women, work on like preventative care when it comes to things like depression and anxiety. So can you speak to what are some common symptoms that people typically deal with when it comes to those two mental health concerns?
Absolutely. So the best way that I describe anxiety, particularly with my clients, is like they are trying to manage instances that might happen in the future as well as managing things in the past. So a lot of times it's that overthinking, kind of ruminating over things that happened yesterday, the day before, or the last year. And they're like living out those experiences in the present, right? And what I have found to be true is that when people live out experiences that happened in the past and the present, it creates that depression. The sadness, the feeling isolated, and sometimes even feel like you don't have control over what's happening in your life. And so a lot of my clients are coming to me essentially for anxiety, but as we unpack, they realize that they are also experiencing a depressive episode. So sometimes those symptoms actually look very similar, but present in different ways. Again, the thought processes tend to be distorted, the irrational thinking, preparing for things that may or may not happen. For a lot of Black women, I think that we manage depression in a very different way. And so it's harder to detect, right? We are probably the most functionally depressed people, if you think about it. And so sometimes it's, you know, always occupying yourself with things, but feeling very tired, lethargic, irritable. And for some people, this idea of angry Black women, when I really talk to Black women to unpack that, sometimes they are just depressed. So it really shows up differently for different people. But I think specifically with Black women, there are some things that clinicians often miss that we, you know, definitely have to be more careful about.
Yes, thank you so much. And the platform specifically caters to people of color. And the reason why that's so important is because from a multicultural perspective, there are certain things that we deal with that are different in comparison to other racial ethnicities, or maybe even just races in general. And so this is nothing to be like divisive about, but like Black mental health is real. And so thank you so much for taking the time to invest in the well-being of women specifically. Now, let's talk about what you had mentioned earlier. It, like you mentioned, a lot of these symptoms may not be easily detected when it comes to Black women. And oftentimes we find ourselves like dealing with our mental health concerns by pushing them away, right? Because we wear so many hats, whether it's being a mom, a sister, teacher, parent, whatever the case may be, even employer, employee. We are literally juggling so many different things. And so what advice, or maybe even what are some tools that we can help women adopt That way they can be able to navigate their mental health concerns as they're switching out their hats.
That is an amazing question. I think in order to even give that advice, we have to talk about the social aspect that allows these particular instances to occur. Culturally, for Black women, Latino women, and probably in some Asian communities, there's this idea about who we are supposed to be, particularly in our roles as our families, how we show up at work, all impacted by socialization, right? As women, but then as women of color. And so I think some of the advice that's most key is for women to really accept and to be permissive in terms of acknowledging their feelings, right? I think the biggest struggle for a lot of people is not wanting to acknowledge that they're not okay. For a lot of us, there are a number of symptoms that we have and we tend to ignore them. Because in our minds, everything else is a priority, right? And so for a lot of women and also women of color, we ignore what's happening with us because our idea is that we are supposed to be responsible for the well-being of other people. And my thought is always, particularly for Black women, we are the most under-resourced people, but the ones most responsible for the care of others. And so it is a very difficult, balance to maintain. So acknowledging how you feel, accepting, but also in terms of coping, surrounding yourself with people who validate your experience. I think, unfortunately, as a culture, there's this history of us not really talking about mental illness. And this is not just within Black communities, but Latino communities and Asian communities. I think that millennials and Gen Z are doing a great job of really bringing those conversations to the forefront, but we'll often say that we're not okay and people will minimize what we're feeling. And so it's important to really find a tribe that is supportive, and participating in therapy, finding a therapist who can really meet your needs. I always tell clients to interview the therapist. Don't just show up at their mercy. Ask them questions because you want to make sure it's a good fit. You're already in a vulnerable position and you want to make sure you go to a space that feels healthy, and really empowers you.
Yes. So for those of you who didn't catch that, the first one is to recognize that it's okay to not be okay. So practicing relentless honesty when it comes to your emotions. Secondly, finding your tribe, get around a group of women or other individuals who are going to be supportive of your experiences. And then thirdly, finding a clinician that is going to help you along your therapeutic journey and not be afraid to advocate for your personal needs.
Absolutely.
Oh, Extriara, you better go, girl. Absolutely love it.
Right.
Even when I think about life roles, I have this document or this worksheet that I give clients, and I'm like, okay, in this top bubble, please list out all of the roles that you operate in. And out of all of those roles, I need you to choose your top 3. And then once you choose your top 3, let's look at your perceived responsibilities. And the reason why I like to focus on perceived responsibilities is because we understand that just because we think something is our responsibility, it really isn't. And so learning to help the client to be able to clear off their plate. It's kind of like going to a cookout. And so you feel like you're hungry and then you start piling on like the macaroni and cheese, the green beans, the chicken, the ribs and stuff like that. But not all of that stuff belongs on your plate. It's okay to take some side plates and go back for seconds or double back. So
yeah, I think that's super important. And I always tell people your feelings are not facts. They belong to you, but what you feel and what's factual is different. And so to your point about ensuring that those roles meet the expectations, that ask people what it is that they sincerely need from you, right? So even in conversation, when people call, our natural inclination is to try to help fix what it is that they're experiencing. Ask, do they really need your help or they just need you to listen, And some of that role, being overwhelmed in those roles, because we want to get in front of things. We become the superhero for everybody else. What I often say to my clients is that their feelings aren't facts, right? What we feel people need from us or expect from us is not always the fact. And so we have to ask people what it is that you need. Even in conversation, when our friends call, when our family members call, we go into this superhero moment. We want to fix whatever it is that they're managing, when in fact, they may just need us to listen. And so asking for clarity so that you're not taking on a role that you're not being asked to take on.
Definitely clarifying what it is that people need. And then also doing that quick heart check, right? Understanding, okay, how much is my identity rooted in this role? Yeah. And what lessons did I acquire about this specific role, right? Especially for us as Black women, we look at our mothers, our grandmothers, our great grandmothers. So there's this belief of what a wife should be like, or what a partner should show up as, or how we should mother, and all those like should statements statement, stop shitting on yourself, you know, those all of those questions, all of those things that we're placing on ourselves. It's like, no, you get a chance to redefine that. Yes, we get to adopt certain beliefs along the way, but you put your personality into them things, you know? Yes.
The thing is, you know, if our grandmothers had have had the option to ask for help, they probably would have. There was no
Listen.
option. You understand what I'm saying? And so I said, you have the option now. They didn't have that choice. They were pushing through because they had to, but if I don't have to push, I'm not gonna do it. So let me ask for what I
Extriara. Oh my gosh, that is so poetic. Recognizing, okay, like our ancestors, people who came before us, they didn't have the option. So please take advantage of that. And I find that to be so important, especially when we're thinking about the concept of like mental health or minority mental health. There's so many resources that weren't readily available. So please, please, please take advantage of that stuff in the here and now. That's so important. Yes. So when it comes to navigating those depressive symptoms, right? Because like we talked about, oftentimes they come hand in hand, right? In the DSM-5, if you look at like major depressive disorder, you also have like anxiety type or things of that nature. Or even when it comes to like anxiety, like you mentioned, all of those symptoms have a tendency of overlapping. How do you assist clients with separating them, or how do you assist clients who are trying to figure out which piece of the elephant to tackle first?
Absolutely. That's an amazing question. Now, this is what I'll say, and I have the privilege of doing this as a LCSW. You know, I tend not to be heavy on diagnosis. I'm very much aware of what my clients may be struggling with, but my position is not to talk with them about their diagnosis, but about their coping and how they can manage in the environments that they're in, right? Mm-hmm. And so usually there's a general conversation about symptomology, duration, cycling, severity, right? So for me, with a lot of clients, of course, I'm generally aware when they come to me and we talk about symptomology, what their diagnosis might be, right? But I always try to work from a place of empowerment. So I'm asking, well, what have you been doing that's been working, right? What hasn't been working, what they would like to see be different or change. And then that's how we go about developing goals and a treatment plan. Now, there are some instances where the symptoms are more severe. And so I really talk with them about what the diagnosis means as it relates to their life, but also working with them to identify the stresses. That's the part that a lot of spaces leave out. People aren't just depressed all the time because it's a chemical imbalance. It's a part of it, but then there are also stressors. So what's happening in your life that's exacerbating your mental illness. Of course, we use all of the diagnostic tools, the Beck Depression Inventory, but a lot of the conversation is around how do you cope? I think it's burdensome to keep talking to someone about their diagnosis. Let's talk about how we get you to a space where you can function better and manage the things that you need to manage. And I think that's what makes it a little bit different for me in terms of my approach to treatment with my clients.
Yeah.
Whatever they want to start with, let's start there. If it's important for you to be able to cope with your anxiety first, because then you think you can manage your depression better, let's start there. But I always ask, I'm there to facilitate change. You know, I feel like people have been living their lives well before they came to see me. And so you're the expert. Tell me what you want to see change and we'll work together to do it.
Absolutely love it. I take that same approach as well. I always let clients know, like, hey, you're the expert of your life because you're the only person who's with yourself 24/7. So even when you don't feel like you are, you actually are. And so it's giving them the opportunity to be able to get a flashlight and shine a light on the things that they might have placed in the back of their corner, something that they probably used to utilize when they were younger that they can bring into adulthood, into the fully present. I think it's very important to, like you mentioned, find that baseline. And even when you were talking about that, immediately I thought about, like, yeah, like the biopsychosocial. What is happening in your entire lifespan? What's going on? What have you been through? What are you currently experiencing? And where are you trying to go?
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. So when it comes to the trauma aspect of it all, how much does that play into exploring depression and anxiety?
Oh my gosh. If I had to guess, and I'm not a numbers person, don't hold me to this, right? I would honestly guesstimate about 60 to 70% of how people show up in terms of their depression and anxiety is because of previous experiences that they had. The tricky part is that most of the time people don't identify trauma as trauma, right? when you ask them, particularly when you're doing the biopsychosocial, you say, have you experienced trauma? And they go, oh, well, no, I was just abused as a kid, but it really wasn't that bad, right? Or somebody sexually assaulted me, but it really wasn't that bad. It takes someone saying to them or making them aware, like, hey, do you know that's traumatizing? Because however you responded to that as a kid is how you're responding now. So if you were anxious as a child as a result of that trauma, that is what you experience now. Our body stores everything.
This year has been a whirlwind, hasn't it? And I'm pretty sure that you and your business have had to make a number of changes as a result of the pandemic. But I need you to get really present right now. Let's tap into the here and now in this very moment. When was the last time you truly checked in on your team? As a matter of fact, when was the last time that you truly thought about how you and your team are mentally and emotionally navigating through all of the adjustments that are taking place? But guess what? I'm here to help with that. Hi, my name is Sierra Hillsman, and I'm a licensed professional counselor and certified clinical trauma professional. I work with small businesses and corporations by helping their teams explore their presenting concerns. That way we can increase employee engagement and improve productivity overall. This can be done through in-person or online lunch and learn events, corporate workshops, and organizational seminars. Click the link below. That way you can start to learn how to truly invest in the overall mental and emotional wellness of your team.
Really don't draw those connections. They just go, oh, well, I'm not okay right now. And my big thing is most of the time, people, you haven't been okay for a long time. You just didn't know. Now it feels unbearable because those coping mechanisms that you were using are no longer working for you. So it isn't that you just became undone. You've been undone for a minute, and it was probably because of the trauma that you experienced some time ago. There's no way around that, you know?
Yes, definitely. It's kind of like with the teddy bears when at Build-A-Bear, where the stuffing is already out and all you need is somebody to come stitch you together. You've already, like you mentioned, you've been undone. You didn't realize that your stuffing was coming out. So that's why it's important for us to seek therapy in order to get that stuff together. Oh, Extriara, I always like to ask clinicians, especially clinicians of color, how did they get into the field? So can you tell me a little bit about your story? People would love to know what got you into the field of mental health.
So this is a transparency moment for me. I'll be honest. My intention was never to be a mental health clinician. Absolutely ran from it. As a social worker, I went in the direction of everything but mental health. However, it was one of those things I kept being drawn to. So at 19, my uncle, who's deceased now, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, And I just remember my grandmother, who's an old Southern Black lady from the Bible Belt, not knowing anything about that and really wanting to help her understand what was happening, right? So that was my first instance. I started working with homeless individuals, and I kept seeing these patterns, like these people are not okay. You cannot give them a job and make this go away. They're literally not okay. And so I started helping them, connecting them with resources and mental health services. And as I moved into adolescent programming, I started women's groups for young women. And I was like, you know what? I kind of like this. This is empowerment. I don't have to do a bunch of assessments, but I can really still, get away with talking about mental health without being in the depth of it, right? But I think the most impactful moment was definitely probably about 10 years ago. My mother experienced a depressive episode, and it was pretty difficult to watch. And for me, it was like, you know what? I got to get in front of this. I remember watching her as a kid not be okay, but not quite understanding what was happening. And at that moment, it was like, you know what? She hasn't been okay for a long time. And what if someone had been in a space to tell her that it was okay not to do that? And so my passion for Black women, for young moms like my mom, is really what just kind of catapulted me into that space. So it's definitely hard work. Of course, we always want to get paid for things, but it is literally the one thing that I would probably do if nobody paid me.
Oh, absolutely love it. Thank you so much for sharing your story and even providing that perspective, because it definitely reminds me as to why I jumped into the field. My father dealt with depression, and when you're growing up, you don't know the language for what your parents are going through. You see your parents as the providers, they're the ones that are also going to give you the answers to life. And so, like you mentioned, it is difficult to watch a parent go through those things. And then eventually we have the choice to be able to reach back and educate our family members moving forward. Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. So can you please let the people know once again a lot more about Lavender Grove Psychotherapy and where they can find you?
Absolutely. So Lavender Grove, we provide virtual and in-person services. So if you need to come in and lay out on the couch or the floor, it is, open and available. Based out of College Park, Georgia, which is probably about 10 minutes outside of Atlanta or less. I'm typically seeing people in person on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and then the rest of the days are also virtual. You can follow me on Instagram at Lavender Grove Psychotherapy as well. I do post content and videos there. I also will occasionally drop appointment availability there when I think of it. Same handle on Facebook. And just in terms of the practice, I always tell people it might be, and I could be bragging about myself, one of the safest places to heal. I show up 100% myself all of the time, and I want my clients to be able to do that. A few days ago, a new client who's actually a therapist came to me, and she was like, I kind of like you. I like it here. This made me feel comfortable. And so I really just tell people to come as they are, to take the cape off, leave it in the door. It's not needed here. But I sincerely try to provide a space that is healthy. Although I specialize in primarily working with Black women, I do have Latina clients. I also have Asian clients, and I also serve Black men. So there is space and enough love for everybody.
Good stuff. And I just want to check because I was like, oh, I wonder if she's accepting clients. So obviously, yes, you are. And then are you only licensed in the state of Georgia, or do you have any other licenses?
I am licensed in Georgia, working on Florida and South Carolina as of.
All right, y'all. So y'all better tap in, okay? Listen, like she said, she is who she is authentically. So if you love what you've seen in this episode, please leave a comment. Please make sure that you're tapping in with her at Lavender Grove Psychotherapy. Thank you, Extriara, for everything that you just dropped today. And before you go, as you know that this is the Legacy Speaks podcast, I always ask my clinicians, okay, what would you like your legacy to say about you?
Oh my gosh. That is such a difficult thing. I hope that the legacy I leave behind is one that embodies God-like qualities. And I know that that's a huge reach, right? But I want to always be known as someone who was open and accepting to everybody, that there was never any judgment, but just a place of love and care. And if I can leave the world with just that, that suits me completely.
Oh, love it. Thank you, ma'am. Once again, y'all, please make sure that you're tapping in with Extriara Gates. And once again, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Legacy Speaks. My name is Sierra Hillsman, licensed professional counselor, founder of the Legacy Speaks podcast. You can stay connected via Legacy SPKS on everything. You can also check out our website at legacyspks.com. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. And please leave a review if you heard anything that resonated with you. Until next time.